When the widowed father opened the root vault beneath his laughed-at tree mansion, he found $260 million that powerful men had spent decades trying to erase, and his life would never be the same. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The hammer slipped from Marcus Reed's calloused hand and clattered against the wooden floor of the half-finished bedroom. He didn't pick it up. He just stood there, staring at the wall he'd been framing for the past 3 hours, trying to remember why any of it mattered anymore. Through the window, the late afternoon sun painted the construction site in shades of amber and gray. Dust particles floated through the light like tiny lost souls searching for somewhere to land. He was 42 years old, and he felt ancient. It had been 8 months since Sarah died. 8 months since the cancer finally took her, slowly, painfully, stealing pieces of her until there was nothing left but a whisper and then silence. She'd been his compass, his reason, his everything. The woman who laughed at his terrible jokes and fell asleep on his shoulder during movies. The mother who sang their children to sleep even when her voice was fading. The love of his life who'd looked at him in those final days and whispered, "Promise me you'll be okay. Promise me you'll take care of them." He'd promised, but he hadn't known how empty that promise would feel. Now he was just a man trying to hold together a life that felt like it was built on sand. Their 2 kids, Emma and Tyler, ages 9 and 12, were staying with Sarah's sister Rachel across town. Marcus told himself it was temporary, just until he could get back on his feet, just until he could finish the house he'd been contracted to build, just until he could breathe again without feeling like his chest was caving in. But some nights, lying alone in the dark, he wondered if he'd ever be whole enough to be the father they needed. The foreman, a gruff man named Dale with silver hair and hands like leather, stuck his head through the doorway. Dale had known Marcus since he was an apprentice, had watched him grow from a kid who could barely swing a hammer straight into one of the best Finnish carpenters in 3 counties. "Marcus, you okay? You've been standing there for 10 minutes, Dale said, his voice rough with concern. Marcus blinked, coming back to himself. "Yeah, sorry, just thinking." Dale gave him that look, the one everyone gave him now. Pity mixed with discomfort, like they wanted to help but didn't know how. Like grief was contagious and they needed to keep their distance. "Go home, man, get some rest. We'll finish up here." Marcus nodded and grabbed his tool belt. Home. The word felt hollow. Home was a small rental on the edge of Harmon Falls, a town so quiet you could hear the creek from 3 blocks away. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, peeling linoleum, a furnace that coughed like it had pneumonia, but it was all he could afford since Sarah's medical bills had hollowed out their savings like termites in old wood. He drove through town in his beat-up Ford pickup, the engine rattling at every stoplight. He passed the diner where they'd had their first date, where Sarah had ordered pancakes at 8 at night and declared it the perfect meal. He passed the elementary school where Emma had learned to read, where Sarah had volunteered every Friday in the library. He passed the cemetery where Sarah's headstone still looked too new, too bright, too wrong against the weathered markers around it. He didn't stop. He couldn't. Not today. When he pulled into his driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon, he found a notice taped to his door. The paper was white, official, cold. He peeled it off with fingers that suddenly felt numb. Eviction notice. 60 days to vacate. Past due rent, $3,200. His stomach dropped like a stone through water. He crumpled the paper in his fist and went inside, the door creaking on hinges he'd been meaning to fix for months. The place was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, growing things that shouldn't exist. Laundry overflowing from baskets like textile waterfalls. Takeout containers scattered across the coffee table like archaeological evidence of a man barely surviving. He'd stopped caring about any of it. Stopped caring about most things, really, except making sure Emma and Tyler were fed and safe, and didn't see how completely their father was falling apart. He sat on the couch, springs groaning beneath him, and put his head in his hands. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight, suffocating and absolute. In the quiet, he could hear Sarah's voice echoing from memory. "You're stronger than you think, Marcus. You just have to remember." But he didn't feel strong. He felt broken, shattered into so many pieces he didn't know where to start putting himself back together. Then his phone buzzed, the vibration loud in the stillness. A text from Dale. "Saw this at the courthouse. Thought of you. Might be worth a look." Below the message was a photo of a flyer tacked to a bulletin board. Estate auction. Saturday 10 a.m. Ironwood Tree Mansion, 15 acres, as is. Minimum bid $5,000. Marcus stared at the photo attached below the text. The structure was bizarre, unlike anything he'd ever seen. A massive estate built around and within an ancient grove of ironwood trees, their trunks as thick as cars, their branches woven through the architecture like the building had grown from the earth itself. Walls curved around living wood, walkways bridged between levels built into the canopy. The whole thing looked like something from a fever dream or a fairy tale gone wild. It looked abandoned, overgrown, forgotten, almost mythical in its strangeness. He'd heard stories about the place growing up. Everyone in Harmon Falls had. Old Gerald Thorne had built it back in the 1960s, a reclusive businessman who'd made his fortune in ways no one could quite pin down. Textiles, some said. Others whispered about shadier dealings, smuggling, money laundering, weapons. The truth was probably somewhere in between, buried under decades of small-town gossip and exaggeration. Thorne had lived there alone for nearly 40 years, never married, rarely seen in town. He'd died in the mansion 20 years ago, and the place had sat empty ever since, tangled in legal disputes and unpaid taxes until the county finally seized it. People said it was cursed. They said Thorne had been paranoid, that he'd built secret rooms and hidden passages, that he'd never trusted banks or people or sunlight. They said he'd gone mad in his final years, wandering the halls, talking to ghosts. They said a lot of things, most of it probably nonsense. But Marcus couldn't stop staring at the photo. There was something about it, something raw and broken and strangely beautiful. The way the trees held the building in their embrace, refusing to let it fall completely. The way nature and human construction had become inseparable, neither able to exist without the other. It reminded him of himself, broken but still standing, held together by something ancient and stubborn. $5,000. He had maybe $6,000 left in his account after paying what he could of the rent. It would be insane to spend it on a derelict property he knew nothing about. Insane to take that kind of risk when he had 2 kids depending on him. But Sarah's voice echoed again. Sometimes the crazy choices are the only ones worth making. He looked at the eviction notice crumpled on his coffee table. Looked at the walls of the rental that had never felt like home. Looked at his empty hands that used to build things, create things, make things beautiful. And he made a decision. On Saturday morning, Marcus stood in a crowd of about 30 people on the county courthouse steps, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets against the October chill. Most of the people around him were real estate speculators with clipboards and calculating eyes, the kind who bought properties at auction and flipped them for profit without ever caring what they meant or what stories they held. A few locals had shown up out of curiosity, whispering and pointing at the photographs displayed on an easel beside the auctioneer. Marcus recognized some of them. Jim Thompson from the hardware store, the mayor's assistant whose name he could never remember, a couple of retired teachers who probably had nothing better to do on a Saturday morning. The auctioneer, a thin man with a nasal voice and a suit that had seen better decades, stepped up to the portable microphone. "Good morning, folks. We're here for the auction of the property commonly known as the Ironwood Tree Mansion, located at 47 Mercy Ridge Road. 15.3 acres, main structure approximately 8,000 square feet, built in 1967, multiple outbuildings, well water, septic system of unknown condition. Property is sold as is, where is, with no inspections, no warranties, no guarantees of habitability. He paused, looking over the crowd with the bored expression of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Let's start the bidding at $5,000. Silence fell over the courthouse steps like a blanket. Marcus glanced around, waiting for someone to jump in. No one moved. People shifted their weight, avoided eye contact with the auctioneer, suddenly found their shoes fascinating. The auctioneer frowned. "Come on, folks. 5,000 for 15 acres and a landmark property? This is the Thorne estate we're talking about." Someone in the back laughed, a sharp bark of derision. "Landmark? That place is a death trap." "Saw the inspection photos," another voice chimed in. "Foundations probably rotted through. Whole thing could come down in the next storm." "You couldn't pay me to take it," muttered a woman near Marcus. "Place gives me the creeps. Always has." Jim Thompson spoke up from the side. "My uncle worked on that property back in '72. Said Thorne was nuts. Had him building walls in weird places, blocking off rooms, installing locks on the inside of doors. Paid good money, though, which is the only reason my uncle stayed." More murmurs of agreement. The crowd seemed united in their conviction that this property was worthless, dangerous, probably haunted. The auctioneer sighed, clearly not surprised by the reaction. "Do I hear 5,000? More silence. Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, something he hadn't felt in months. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was close. It was possibility. It was the faint whisper that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth reaching for in this world. Before he could talk himself out of it, he raised his hand. 5,000! The crowd turned to look at him like he'd just volunteered to jump off a cliff. Whispers erupted immediately. Someone snickered. Marcus felt his face flush but kept his hand up. The auctioneer perked up, almost surprised. "We have 5,000 from bidder number 73. Do I hear 6? Nothing, just stares and whispers. "Anyone? 6,000? Dead silence. "Going once." The auctioneer paused dramatically. "Going twice." Another pause. "Sold to bidder number 73 for $5,000. Just like that, Marcus Reed became the owner of the most mocked property in 3 counties. As he signed the paperwork inside the courthouse, the clerk processing the sale gave him a sympathetic look. "You know what you're getting into with this place?" "No," Marcus admitted. "Not really." "Probably for the best," she said, stamping the deed. "Sometimes ignorance is bliss." Behind him he heard 2 women talking as they left. One said to the other, "Poor bastard, he just bought himself a nightmare." Her companion replied, "Did you see him? Looked half dead already. What's he thinking?" "He's not. That's the problem." Marcus pretended not to hear, but their words settled into his chest like stones. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was the stupidest decision he'd ever made, but it was done now. For better or worse, the tree mansion was his. 2 days later, Marcus drove out to the property with Emma and Tyler beside him in the truck. He'd picked them up early from Rachel's, telling her only that he wanted to show the kids something. Rachel had looked skeptical. She always looked skeptical these days, but she'd let them go. They rattled down Mercy Ridge Road, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that gave way to dirt after the first 2 miles. The forest pressed in on both sides, old-growth timber that had stood since before the town existed. Oak and pine and ironwood, their trunks massive, their canopy so thick it blocked out most of the morning sun. "Where are we going?" Emma asked from the middle of the bench seat, her small hand gripping Marcus's arm. "You'll see," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Tyler, older and more cautious, frowned out the window. "This road goes nowhere, Dad. I've ridden my bike out here before. It just ends." "Not anymore," Marcus said. Another mile of bouncing over potholes and dodging fallen branches, and then the road curved sharply. The trees opened up, and there it was. Emma gasped, her eyes going wide. "Dad, it looks like something from a fairy tale!" She wasn't wrong. The structure rose from the forest like it had been conjured from the earth itself by some ancient magic. The ironwood trees were enormous, their trunks easily 12 to 15 feet in diameter, their bark dark and deeply furrowed. Someone, Thorne presumably, had built the mansion around them, incorporating the living trees into the architecture like natural pillars. Wooden walkways connected different levels, winding around branches and through hollowed sections of trunk. The roof was a patchwork of slate tiles and living wood, moss creeping across shingles, vines draping like green curtains from the eaves. Some sections of the building seemed to grow organically from the trees themselves, the line between construction and nature completely blurred. It was wild, it was impossible, it was magnificent in the way storms are magnificent, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. Tyler's frown deepened. "Dad, it looks like it's gonna fall down." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, pulling the truck to a stop in the circular driveway that had been overtaken by weeds. "But that's why we're here. To see if it's worth saving." They climbed out of the truck. The air smelled different here, rich with earth and moss and the sweet decay of leaves that had fallen for decades. Birds called from high in the canopy. Somewhere in the distance Marcus could hear water running, maybe a creek or spring. They approached the main entrance together, Emma holding Marcus's hand, Tyler walking slightly ahead with the false bravado of a 12-year-old trying not to be scared. The front door was massive, a heavy oak slab set into a frame carved from a single piece of ironwood. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, even weathered and neglected as it was. Marcus tried the handle. It turned far too smoothly for a place supposedly untouched for 20 years. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty halls beyond. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of earth and old wood and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. Not rot exactly, but age. The scent of time itself. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls and broken windows, casting strange shadows that danced across dusty floors. The main room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into the branches above. A spiral staircase wrapped around one of the tree trunks, leading to upper levels Marcus could barely make out in the gloom. Everything was covered in dust and debris, fallen leaves that had blown in through broken panes, fragments of plaster from damaged walls, remnants of furniture that had been left to decay. But beneath the neglect, Marcus could see the bones of something extraordinary. "Can we explore?" Emma asked, her voice small in the vast space. "Stay together," Marcus said, "and be careful. The floors might not be stable." They spent the next hour moving through the mansion, room by room, discovery by discovery. Some areas were in surprisingly good condition, solid floors, intact walls, even a few pieces of furniture that looked salvageable with some work. A chair carved from a single piece of wood, a table with legs that twisted like vines, a mirror frame decorated with leaves that seemed almost alive. Other sections were disasters, collapsed ceilings where water had gotten in, floors that sagged dangerously, evidence of animals nesting in corners, raccoons probably, maybe possums, the kind of wildlife that moved into human spaces when humans abandoned them. But the bones of the place were strong. The ironwood trees held everything together like a skeleton made of iron and time, their massive trunks bearing weight that would have crushed normal construction. In what might have once been a study, Marcus found shelves lined with books that had rotted into pulpy masses, their pages fused together by moisture and time. A desk sat beneath a window, its surface covered in papers that disintegrated when he touched them, words dissolving into dust. Tyler discovered a kitchen with a cast-iron stove that still looked functional, its surface rusty but solid. The cabinets were handmade, each door carved with intricate patterns of leaves and roots. Emma found a bedroom on the second level with a window that perfectly framed the forest beyond. She stood there for a long moment, staring out at the trees, then turned to Marcus with shining eyes. "This one's mine." "We're not living here, Em," Marcus said gently. "We're just looking." "But we could, right? We could fix it up and live here?" Marcus glanced around the damaged room, at the ceiling with water stains and the floor with gaps between boards. "Maybe. Someday. If it's even possible." "It's possible," Emma said with the absolute certainty only a 9-year-old can muster. "I can tell." They continued exploring, working their way down from the upper levels. Marcus made mental notes of everything that needed repair, which was essentially everything. New roof, new windows, rewiring, if there was even electrical service out here, plumbing work, foundation assessment. The list grew longer with each room, but something kept pulling him deeper into the structure. A feeling he couldn't quite name, like the house was trying to tell him something. They were on the main floor, exploring what looked like it had once been a dining room, when Tyler noticed a door partially hidden behind a collapsed bookshelf. "Dad, look, there's stairs going down." Marcus moved the rotted shelving aside, wood crumbling in his hands. Behind it was indeed a door, and beyond that, stone steps descending into darkness. "A basement," he murmured. "Can we go down?" Tyler asked. Marcus hesitated. Every instinct said no. Dark basements in abandoned houses were where horror movies happened. But curiosity won out over caution. "Stay close to me." He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The steps were solid stone, worn smooth in the center from decades of footsteps. They descended carefully, Marcus in front, the kids right behind him. The basement wasn't what he expected. Instead of being dug into the ground in the traditional sense, it had been built into the root system of the trees. The roots were massive down here, some as thick as his torso, and they'd been carefully incorporated into the structure. Walls followed root lines, passages curved around underground networks. It was like walking through the veins of a living giant. The air was different down here, cooler, drier, almost sterile. The smell of earth was stronger, mixed with something else. Stone dust, maybe, or old concrete. They moved through several chambers, each one revealing more of the intricate root system. Marcus had never seen anything like it. The engineering alone was extraordinary. Whoever had built this had understood the trees, had worked with them rather than against them. And then, in the deepest chamber, behind a tangle of roots that formed a natural barrier, Marcus saw something that didn't belong, a wall. Not made of wood or stone, but concrete, smooth, modern concrete that looked decades newer than the rest of the structure. "What's that?" Emma whispered. Marcus pushed through the roots, Emma and Tyler following close behind. The concrete wall was about 8 feet wide and reached from floor to ceiling. And set into it, barely visible in the shadows, was something that made Marcus's heart start to pound. A door, not wooden, but metal. Steel by the look of it, with a surface that had been treated to prevent rust. It sat flush against the concrete, seamless except for one detail in the center. A lock. Old-fashioned, circular. The kind that required a combination. Marcus ran his hand across the cold surface. No handle. No hinges visible from this side, just a door that seemed to have been poured into place, meant to seal something away forever. "What is that?" Tyler whispered, his voice carrying a mix of fear and fascination. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. Emma stepped closer, running her small fingers along the edge where metal met concrete. "Do you think there's treasure inside?" Under different circumstances, Marcus would have laughed. But standing there in the dim flashlight glow, staring at a sealed door hidden in the deepest part of an abandoned mansion, he couldn't quite dismiss the idea. "Probably just an old wine cellar or storage room," he said, more to convince himself than the kids. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. There was something about this door, something about the way it had been concealed behind roots and concrete, that told him it was more than that, much more. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide this, to protect it, to make sure it stayed sealed. The question was, why? Marcus examined the lock more closely. It was well made, expensive even by modern standards. The kind of thing you'd find on a bank vault, not a residential cellar. No rust, no visible damage, like it had been maintained or protected somehow. He tried the combination dial experimentally. It turned smoothly, precisely, with the satisfying mechanical click of quality engineering. "Can you open it?" Tyler asked. "Not without the combination." "Maybe we can find it somewhere," Emma suggested, "like a clue or something." Marcus smiled despite himself. His daughter had always loved mystery stories. "Maybe, kiddo, but not today. We should head back up before it gets dark." They made their way back through the root chambers, up the stone stairs, and out into the fading afternoon light. As they emerged into the main hall, Marcus turned to look back at the door to the basement. Something was down there. Something important enough to seal behind steel and concrete. Something someone had wanted to keep hidden. And now, whether he was ready for it or not, it belonged to him. That night, back at the rental with the kids returned to Rachel's, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the metal door, about the tree mansion, about all the whispered stories he'd heard growing up. Gerald Thorne never trusted banks. Gerald Thorne was paranoid. Gerald Thorne had secrets. What if the stories weren't entirely fiction? What if there was some truth buried in all that small-town gossip? At 2 a.m, Marcus gave up on sleep. He got up and went to his laptop, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of his failing life. Unpaid bills, eviction notices, empty coffee cups. He started searching. Gerald Thorne, Harmon Falls. Ironwood Tree Mansion history. Gerald Thorne fortune. Most of what he found was local folklore and rumors, blog posts by amateur historians, discussion threads on regional history forums. But buried in an old newspaper archive, digitized and barely searchable, he discovered something interesting. An article from 1998, just after Thorne's death. Reclusive millionaire dies alone, estate value unclear. Marcus read it twice, his pulse quickening with each word. The article mentioned that Thorne's court-appointed lawyer had been unable to locate the bulk of his fortune. Bank accounts held only modest amounts, a few $100,000, enough to cover final expenses, but nowhere near what Thorne should have been worth. No safety deposit boxes, no investment portfolios, no real estate beyond the mansion itself. The estate had been in legal limbo for years, with distant relatives fighting over what they assumed was a hidden fortune. Eventually they'd given up. The property had been abandoned, taxes had gone unpaid, and the county had finally seized it. But the money, Thorne's real money, had never been found. Marcus sat back from the laptop, his mind racing. If Thorne's fortune had never been located, where had it gone? He thought about the metal door hidden in the root chamber, the perfect seal, the vault-grade lock, the way it had been concealed behind concrete and living wood in a place most people would never think to look, and he felt his hands start to shake. What if the stories were true? What if Thorne really had hidden something down there? What if that sealed door didn't protect a wine cellar or storage space, but something far more valuable? Marcus looked at the eviction notice on his table, at the stack of medical bills he'd never be able to pay, at the photograph of Sarah on the shelf, smiling in the sunshine, holding baby Emma. He needed to know what was behind that door. He needed to know if there was any chance, any possibility at all, that he could turn this insane purchase into something that could save his family. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he'd go back to the tree mansion, and he'd find a way to open that door, because sometimes the crazy choices really are the only ones worth making. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the rental, and 15 miles away in the darkness of the forest, the tree mansion stood waiting, holding its secrets close, patient as the ancient ironwoods that cradled it. The roots went deep, deeper than anyone knew. And soon, Marcus Reed would discover just how deep they truly were. Marcus returned to the tree mansion before sunrise. He'd barely slept, his mind churning through possibilities, and by 4 in the morning he'd given up pretending rest would come. He threw on clothes, grabbed his tools, and drove through the dark forest roads with only his headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. The mansion looked different in the early morning mist, less like a fairy tale and more like something ancient and knowing. The ironwood trees loomed above it, their massive branches reaching toward a sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. Marcus sat in his truck for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and stared at the structure. Somewhere beneath those wooden floors and root-tangled chambers was a sealed door. And behind that door, possibly nothing. Possibly everything. He grabbed his toolbox and a heavy-duty flashlight and made his way inside. The mansion was silent except for the creaking of old wood and the whisper of wind through gaps in the walls. Birds were just beginning to stir in the canopy above, their soft calls echoing through the empty halls. Marcus descended the stone steps to the basement, his flashlight beam cutting through darkness that seemed thicker somehow, more resistant to light. The root chamber sprawled before him, and he made his way through the twisted passages to the concrete wall and its sealed metal door. In the better light of his professional-grade flashlight, he could see more details. The concrete was smooth but not perfectly so. There were marks, impressions left by wooden forms during the pour. This had been done carefully, but not by professional contractors. Someone had mixed and poured this concrete themselves, probably Thorne, working alone to ensure no one else knew what he was hiding. Marcus examined the lock again. It was a mechanical combination lock, old but pristine, no rust, no corrosion. The seal around the door was equally perfect, suggesting some kind of gasket or weather stripping to keep moisture out. He stepped back, playing his flashlight across the surrounding area. If there was a combination, where would Thorne have hidden it? Not written down somewhere obvious, that would defeat the purpose, but somewhere he could find it if needed, somewhere that would look natural, accidental. His light passed across the roots, forming the natural barrier in front of the concrete wall. Massive things, some easily 2 feet in diameter, they twisted and curved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Marcus had noticed it yesterday but hadn't thought much of it. Now, looking closer, he saw something that made his pulse quicken. The roots didn't grow randomly. They formed shapes. Where certain roots intersected, small marks had been carved into the wood, not deep, not obvious, but there. Numbers. Marcus moved closer, tracing the pattern with his flashlight and his fingers. The roots created a kind of map, and where specific roots crossed, a number had been carefully etched into the bark. So small you'd miss them if you weren't looking. So subtle they appeared natural, just part of the wood's texture. But they were there. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures, documenting each number and its position. Then he stepped back and tried to see the pattern as a whole. The roots spiraled inward toward the door, and following that spiral, the numbers created a sequence. 7, 3, 8, 4, 2, 9. Marcus stared at the combination for a long moment, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was it. This had to be it. Thorne had hidden the combination in plain sight, carved into living wood that would grow and change, but never quite erase what he'd put there. With hands that trembled slightly, Marcus approached the lock. The dial was smooth under his fingers, well machined, precise. He started turning. 7. Click. 3. Click. 8. Click. 4. Click. 2. Click. 9. Click. For a moment, nothing happened. Marcus held his breath, wondering if he'd gotten it wrong, if this was just wishful thinking and pattern recognition run wild. Then he heard it. A sound deep within the door mechanism, the heavy thunk of bolts retracting, locks disengaging. The sound echoed through the root chamber like a gunshot. Marcus froze, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. Slowly, carefully, he pushed against the door. It didn't budge at first. 20 years of settlement, of the building shifting, of seals compressed by time. Then, with a hiss of air that smelled stale and dry and utterly lifeless, the door began to move. It swung inward on hinges that impossibly still worked smoothly, and beyond it, darkness opened like a mouth. Marcus shone his flashlight inside and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The chamber beyond was enormous, far larger than should have been possible. It had been carved into the root system like a natural cathedral, the walls following the curves of massive underground roots, the ceiling disappearing into tangles of wood above. But it wasn't the size that stole his breath. It was what filled it. Containers. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Stacked on shelves that had been carved from the roots themselves. Metal cases, plastic-wrapped bundles, wooden crates with military-style stenciling. All organized with meticulous precision, labeled and arranged like inventory in a warehouse. Marcus stepped inside, his legs unsteady. The air was cool and dry, almost sterile. Some kind of dehumidification system must have been installed, though he couldn't see it. The preservation was extraordinary. He moved to the nearest shelf and examined the containers, heavy-duty metal cases, the kind designed for long-term storage. Waterproof, airtight, built to last decades. His hands shook as he reached for one. It was lighter than expected. He set it on the ground, found the latches, and opened it. Inside, wrapped in clear plastic, were stacks of bills. $100 bills, bundled and pristine, like they'd just come from the bank. Marcus picked up one bundle, feeling the weight of it, the reality of it. This wasn't a few $1,000s squirreled away. This was serious money. He checked another case, more bills, 50s this time, just as carefully preserved. A third case, hundreds again, but older bills, the design from decades past. Marcus's breath came faster now. He moved deeper into the chamber, opening cases at random. Bills, gold coins in protective sleeves, bearer bonds in waterproof folders, jewelry boxes lined with velvet, holding watches and rings and necklaces that gleamed in his flashlight beam. In the center of the room stood a wooden desk, simple and solid. On it sat a single sheet of paper, protected under a piece of glass. Marcus approached it slowly, almost afraid of what it might say. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the letters formed by someone who'd taken their time. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, then I'm long gone, and my secret has outlasted me. I spent my life building a fortune, but I spent my later years hiding it from those who would take it, misuse it, or destroy me for it. The government wanted it. My family wanted it. Criminals wanted it. So I buried it where none of them would think to look, in the roots of the oldest living things I could find. There is a fortune in this vault. It's yours now. Use it wisely. Use it well. Don't let it destroy you the way the fear of losing it destroyed me. Gerald Thorne. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. This was real. This wasn't some fantasy or delusion brought on by grief and desperation. This was actual physical wealth, hidden for decades, waiting. He thought of Sarah, of the medical bills that had crushed them, of the treatments they couldn't afford, the clinical trials she couldn't access because they didn't have the money for travel and lodging, of the nights she'd cried because she knew what it was costing him, costing their children, costing their future. "Promise me you'll be okay," she'd whispered near the end, her hand barely able to squeeze his. "Promise me you'll take care of them." He'd promised, but he hadn't known how, until now. Marcus sank to his knees on the cold stone floor, surrounded by more money than he'd ever imagined, and the weight of it crashed over him like a wave. Not the weight of the wealth itself, but the weight of possibility, of second chances, of futures that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. He pressed his palms against his eyes and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Then he stood and started documenting everything. He took photographs of the cases, the shelves, the organization. He opened containers methodically, making mental notes of contents: cash in various denominations, gold bullion, coins, American Eagles, Krugerrands, Old Double Eagles, stock certificates from companies he recognized and some he didn't, property deeds to land all over the country, gemstones in protective cases, art, small pieces, carefully wrapped and preserved. It took 2 hours to do even a cursory inventory, and by the end, Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He pulled up the calculator app and started doing rough math based on what he'd seen. Conservative estimates. Assuming some of the assets were worthless or depreciated, the number kept climbing. 10 million, 20 million, 50 million. He stopped calculating. It was too much, too overwhelming. The exact amount didn't matter because any amount would change everything. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus sat on the stone floor of the vault, his back against one of the massive roots, and let himself remember. Sarah. Not Sarah dying, not Sarah sick, but Sarah alive and full of dreams. It had been 5 years ago, before the diagnosis, before everything fell apart. They'd been lying in bed on a Sunday morning, Emma and Tyler still asleep down the hall. Sunlight poured through the window, painting everything gold. Sarah had been tracing patterns on his chest with her finger, that absent-minded gesture she did when she was thinking. "What would you do if we won the lottery?" she'd asked suddenly. Marcus had laughed. "We don't play the lottery." "I know, but what if? What would you do with, I don't know, $1 million? He'd thought about it, really thought about it. "Buy you a house with a porch swing, big yard for the kids, maybe a workshop where I could build furniture, real pieces, not just contractor work." Sarah had smiled. "That's it? That's all you'd want?" "What else is there? I've got you. I've got the kids, a house and the freedom to create things. That's not a small dream, Sarah. That's everything." She'd kissed him then, soft and sweet. "You're a good man, Marcus Reed. Too good for this world sometimes." "What would you do?" he'd asked. She'd been quiet for a moment, her fingers still tracing lazy circles. "I'd want to help people. Start a foundation or something. For families dealing with medical stuff. You know how expensive everything is. How many people go bankrupt just trying to stay alive? I'd want to fix that, take that fear away from people." "That's a big dream. You said I could dream big. Lottery money, remember?" He'd pulled her closer. "Dream as big as you want. You deserve it all." She'd laughed, that bright sound he missed so desperately. "I've already got it all. Everything that matters. The rest would just be icing." Marcus opened his eyes in the dim vault, tears running down his face. She'd wanted to help people. Even in her wildest fantasies about impossible wealth, Sarah had wanted to use it to ease suffering, to take fear away from families facing what they'd eventually face themselves. And now he had the means to do exactly that. But first, he had to figure out what he was dealing with. He had to understand Gerald Thorne, who he'd been, what he'd feared, why he'd gone to such extraordinary lengths to hide this wealth. Marcus sealed the vault, reset the lock, and made his way back to town. He spent the afternoon at the Harmon Falls Library, a small brick building that smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, he made a mental note that the name didn't match the instruction about not using Chen, but this was a real person he'd known for years. Actually, Mrs. Patterson looked surprised to see him. "Marcus Reed! Goodness, I haven't seen you since the funeral. How are you holding up, dear?" "Getting by," he said, which was the only answer that felt true. "I need to look at local history. specifically anything about Gerald Thorne. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Gerald Thorne? That's a name I haven't heard in years. Why the sudden interest? Marcus hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. I bought his property, the Tree Mansion. Thought I should learn about the previous owner. You bought? She stopped herself, clearly biting back whatever judgment she wanted to express. Well, there's not much written down, but we do have some newspaper archives and a few local history books that mention him. Let me show you. She led him to a back corner with filing cabinets and a microfilm reader that probably hadn't been used in a decade. Everything's being digitized eventually, but for now, old-fashioned research. The newspapers are on microfilm. The books are on that shelf. Good luck. Marcus spent the next 4 hours reading everything he could find. The story that emerged was both tragic and troubling. Gerald Thorne had been born in 1932, the son of a textile mill owner. He'd inherited the business in his early 20s and expanded it aggressively through the 50s and 60s. By all accounts, he'd been brilliant but ruthless, buying up competitors, consolidating power, making enemies along the way. He'd married in 1955, had 2 children, by all outward appearances, led a normal, successful life. Then something changed. Articles from the mid-1960s began mentioning troubles at Thorne's companies, investigations into labor practices, accusations of fraud, though never proven, questions about his business dealings. The tone shifted from respectful business coverage to something darker, more suspicious. In 1967, the same year he built the Tree Mansion, Thorne had abruptly sold all his business interests. The articles didn't say why, just noted that the sales were unexpected and below market value. After that, he'd essentially disappeared from public life. His wife had divorced him in 1971, taking the children. A brief article mentioned a separation due to irreconcilable differences and concerns for family safety. Family safety. Marcus underlined that phrase in his notes. Thorne had lived alone in the Tree Mansion from 1971 until his death in 1998. 27 years of isolation. A few articles mentioned him peripherally. Complaints to the county about trespassers on his property or his name appearing on lists of major landowners, but nothing substantial. When he died, found by a mail carrier who'd noticed newspapers piling up, the brief obituary mentioned no survivors, no funeral, no memorial. Just a notice that Gerald Thorne, 76, had died alone in his home, and the county was handling the estate. Marcus sat back, rubbing his eyes. This was a man who'd been afraid, not just cautious or private, but genuinely terrified. Something had happened in the mid-60s to turn a successful businessman into a paranoid recluse who hid his fortune in a vault beneath his home. He found one more piece of the puzzle in a collection of letters donated to the library's historical archives. Correspondence from various Harmon Falls residents preserved for posterity. Buried in a folder labeled Local Business 1960s was a letter from Thorne to the town council dated December 1966. The letter requested permission to install a private well and septic system on his newly purchased property on Mercy Ridge Road. Nothing unusual there. But in the margins, someone, probably a council member, had written notes. One comment stood out. Spoke with GT in person, seems agitated, mentioned security concerns and need for self-sufficiency. Approved request but recommended wellness check. Security concerns, self-sufficiency. The language of someone expecting trouble. Marcus photographed the letter with his phone, then continued digging. In a thin volume called Architectural Oddities of Western Carolina, he found a brief mention of the Tree Mansion with a black and white photograph from 1968. The caption read, Ironwood Estate, built by Gerald Thorne. Unique integration of ancient trees with modern construction. Owner declined to comment on design inspiration or construction methods. The photograph showed the mansion in its prime. Clean lines, fresh wood, the trees healthy and magnificent. But what caught Marcus's attention was a detail in the background. A concrete truck, construction equipment, and Thorne himself, a blurry figure directing workers. No, not workers, worker, singular, one person helping, and the rest of the work appeared to be Thorne's alone. Marcus zoomed in on the photo with his phone. Thorne had built most of this himself, the concrete vault, the concealment, all of it done with minimal help, maximum secrecy. This wasn't just hiding assets. This was a man preparing for siege. By the time the library closed, Marcus had a clearer picture. Thorne had been wealthy, had made enemies, and had hidden his fortune to protect it from someone or something he feared more than isolation, more than loneliness, more than the judgment of a town that thought he'd lost his mind. And now that fortune belonged to Marcus. That night, Marcus returned to the tree mansion. He had to see it again, had to make sure it was real and not some grief-induced hallucination. He descended into the vault with better lighting this time, a battery-powered LED lantern that filled the chamber with harsh white light. The containers sat exactly as he'd left them, silent, patient, real. He opened more of them, trying to get a better sense of the full scope. In one case, he found documents, the originals of property deeds, stock certificates, purchase agreements, everything organized by date, by type, by value. Thorne had been meticulous. In another case, jewelry. Not costume jewelry, but serious pieces. Diamond necklaces, platinum watches, ruby rings. Things that belonged in museums or vaults, not hidden underground. A third case contained gold bars, each one stamped with weight and purity. 20 bars, each weighing exactly 1 kilogram. At current gold prices, Marcus did quick math in his head. Nearly $2 million in this case alone. He kept opening containers, kept discovering more. By midnight, he'd examined maybe a third of what was there, and his conservative estimate had climbed past $100 million. His phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. "Kids are asking when you're coming by. Emma misses you." Guilt crashed over him. He'd been so consumed with this discovery he'd barely thought about his children, about the life he was supposed to be rebuilding. He texted back, "Tomorrow, breakfast, my treat." Then he sat in the vault, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, and wondered what the hell he was supposed to do with it. He couldn't just take it, could he? There would be questions. The IRS, law enforcement, people wondering how a struggling carpenter suddenly had millions. But he couldn't leave it here either. Couldn't pretend he hadn't found it. Marcus looked at the letter from Thorne again, the one under glass on the desk. Use it wisely. Use it well. Don't let it destroy you the way the fear of losing it destroyed me. That last line carried a warning. This money had destroyed Thorne's life, isolated him, turned him into a ghost haunting his own property. Marcus wouldn't let that happen. He'd find a way to do this right, legally, safely. He'd use it to honor Sarah, to help people the way she'd dreamed of helping them. But first, he needed help. He needed someone he could trust. The next morning, Marcus met Dale at the diner in town. The same diner where he and Sarah had their first date, where everything had seemed possible and the future had stretched out bright and endless. They sat in a back booth. Dale ordered coffee and eggs. Marcus ordered coffee and tried to figure out how to start this conversation. "You look like you haven't slept," Dale said. "I haven't, not really." "The tree mansion?" Marcus nodded. "Dale, I need to show you something. But I need you to promise me you won't tell anyone." "Not yet." Dale studied him for a long moment. They'd known each other for 20 years. Dale had been at his wedding, had visited Sarah in the hospital, had helped carry her coffin. "You're scaring me, Marcus. I'm scaring myself." After breakfast, they drove out to the property together. Dale looked around at the massive ironwood trees, the wild architecture, and let out a low whistle. "I'll say this, you don't do anything small." "You have no idea." Marcus led him through the mansion, down into the basement, through the root chambers. When they reached the concrete wall and the metal door, Dale stopped. "What the hell is that?" "Just wait." Marcus entered the combination. The locks disengaged with that same heavy thunk. The door swung open. Marcus turned on his lantern, flooding the vault with light. Dale stood in the doorway, mouth open, staring at the rows of containers, the organized wealth, the impossible reality. "Holy Mother of God," he whispered. They stood there for a long moment, the weight of discovery settling between them. Finally, Dale turned to Marcus. "How much?" "I don't know exactly. More than 100 million, probably a lot more." Dale ran a hand through his graying hair. "Jesus, Marcus. Jesus Christ." "I know." You can't just keep this. Can you?" "I don't know. That's why I'm showing you. I need help figuring this out." Dale walked into the vault slowly, like a man in a dream. He touched one of the metal cases, then jerked his hand back like it burned. They spent the next hour going through containers together, Dale's expression growing more stunned with each discovery. When they finally emerged back into daylight, Dale leaned against Marcus's truck, looking pale. "You know what this means, right?" Dale said. "That I'm not going to lose the rental? That I can afford a lawyer for the custody situation with Rachel? That my kids can go to college?" "All that, yeah. But also—" Dale stopped, choosing his words carefully. "People are going to find out. You can't keep this secret forever. And when they do, some of them are going to want it. Some of them are going to think they deserve it." Marcus felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "You think I'm in danger?" "I think you need to be very, very careful about what you do next. This isn't lottery money, Marcus. This is hidden wealth. There's probably a reason it was hidden." As if in answer, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" Silence, then breathing, then a voice, distorted, mechanical, clearly disguised. "We know what you found." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been looking for that money for a very long time. You have 48 hours to decide if you want to live." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, his hand trembling. Dale looked at him, face grave. "What was that?" "A threat." Marcus's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Someone knows." "How? You just found it. Who could possibly—" "I don't know." Marcus looked back at the tree mansion, at the ancient ironwood standing sentinel. "But Dale, I think I just inherited more than money. I think I inherited Gerald Thorne's enemies. And somewhere in the forest, unseen and patient, those enemies were watching, waiting, ready to claim what they believed was theirs. The roots went deep, but so did the darkness that had hunted this fortune for decades. And now Marcus Reed, carpenter and widower and father, stood directly in its path. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in his rental with every light on, a baseball bat beside the couch, jumping at every sound. The mechanical voice from the phone call echoed in his head. "We know what you found." How could anyone know? He'd been careful. Only Dale had seen the vault, unless someone had been watching the property for years, waiting for exactly this moment. By dawn, exhaustion and determination had fused into something sharp and focused. Marcus wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to hide. But he needed answers, and he needed them fast. He called Dale at 6 in the morning. "I'm going back to the vault. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. Every dollar, every document, everything Thorne left behind." "After that phone call? Marcus, that's insane." "Probably. But I can't make decisions based on partial information. Come with me or don't, but I'm going." Dale was silent for a moment. "Give me 30 minutes, and I'm bringing my shotgun." They arrived at the tree mansion as the sun climbed above the forest canopy, painting the ironwood trees in shades of gold and amber. Dale's truck pulled in behind Marcus's, and the older man climbed out carrying not just a shotgun but also a thermos of coffee and a grim expression. "We're probably being paranoid," Dale said, loading shells into the shotgun. "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But Thorne was paranoid too, and someone still knew enough to threaten me." They entered the mansion together, moving through the now familiar halls to the basement stairs. The root chamber seemed darker today, more oppressive, like the weight of secrets pressed down from above. Marcus entered the combination with practiced ease now. 7, 3, 8, 4, 2, 9. The locks disengaged. The door swung open. The vault waited. They spent the entire day doing a complete inventory. Marcus had brought a laptop, a scale, and a determination to count every last dollar. Dale took photographs of everything while Marcus created a detailed spreadsheet. By noon, they'd cataloged the cash. $187 million in various denominations, all carefully preserved in waterproof containers. Most of it in hundreds and fifties, but some in older bills that were probably worth more to collectors than their face value. "Jesus Christ," Dale muttered for the 20th time. 187 million in cash. Who keeps that much cash? "Someone who doesn't trust banks," Marcus said. "Someone who wants it accessible, untraceable, ready to use or move at a moment's notice." The gold came next. Bars, coins, even some gold jewelry that was clearly valued for its melt weight rather than craftsmanship. Marcus weighed it all, checked current gold prices on his phone, and did the math. $42 million in gold. Bearer bonds came next, and this is where things got complicated. Some were still valid, issued by corporations that still existed. Others were from companies long dissolved. Marcus made notes to have them professionally appraised, but his conservative estimate put them at 15 million. Then came the real estate documents. Property deeds to land scattered across 7 states. Some in cities, some in rural areas, all purchased decades ago and apparently forgotten. Marcus couldn't value these without research, but even conservative estimates of land appreciation made his head spin. Gemstones, jewelry, collectible coins, art pieces, stock certificates from companies both living and dead. By the time the sun began to set, Marcus sat back and looked at the final number on his spreadsheet. $260 million. Give or take a few million for valuation uncertainties, but that was the number. $260 million hidden in a vault beneath a tree mansion, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to find it. Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. The weight of it pressed against his chest like a physical thing. This wasn't winning the lottery. This wasn't inheritance. This was something else entirely. A burden, a responsibility, a target painted on his back. "What are you going to do?" Dale asked quietly. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But I need to understand why Thorne hid it. Not just that he was afraid. I need to know what he was afraid of." They found the answer in a filing cabinet Marcus had overlooked the first time, tucked in the back corner of the vault. Inside were folders organized by year, each one containing documents, letters, and handwritten notes. Marcus started with the earliest folder marked 1965 to 1968. The story that emerged was chilling. Gerald Thorne had made his fortune legitimately in the textile business, but in the mid-1960s, he'd gotten involved with the wrong people. Not intentionally. He'd needed investors to expand his operations, and he'd taken money from a group that turned out to be connected to organized crime. By the time Thorne realized what he'd done, it was too late. The mob had leveraged their investment into control, using his businesses to launder money. Thorne had tried to extricate himself, but they'd made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. A letter from 1966, typed on plain paper with no signature, spelled it out. "Your cooperation is not optional. You will continue to process our transactions, or we will destroy you and everyone you love. Your wife, your children, everyone." Another letter, dated 6 months later. We know you've been talking to federal investigators. Stop immediately, or the consequences will be permanent. Thorne's handwritten notes in the margins told the rest of the story. He'd been terrified, trapped between the mob and federal prosecutors. So he'd made a choice. He'd liquidated everything he could, sold his businesses at a loss, and taken his fortune underground, literally. He'd built the Tree Mansion as a fortress, isolated, defensible, with a vault that even his enemies couldn't find. A journal entry from 1967 written in shaky handwriting. I've destroyed my life to save it. My wife thinks I've gone mad. My children don't recognize me, but I can't let them take everything. I won't. If I have to live alone in these woods for the rest of my life, at least I'll live free of their threats. Except he hadn't lived free. He'd lived in fear. The subsequent folders told of decades of paranoia, reports of cars watching the property, attempted break-ins, threatening phone calls. Thorne had documented everything, convinced his enemies would eventually find him. In a folder marked 1997, just a year before his death, Marcus found the final piece of the puzzle. A letter from someone named Vincent Corso. Gerald, I know what you took. I know what you hid. I worked for the same people you ran from, and I've spent 30 years looking for that money. I'm old now, like you. Tired, but I'm not done. Someone will find it eventually, and when they do, I'll be waiting. The money was never yours. You stole it when you liquidated, and stolen money always finds its way home. Marcus's hands shook as he read. Dale, this money, some of it might not have been Thorne's to hide. Dale looked up from the photographs he'd been organizing. What do you mean? The mob money, the laundered funds. Thorne liquidated businesses that were being used for criminal purposes. Some of this fortune might be connected to organized crime. Might be? I don't know. The documents aren't clear, but if Corso is still alive, if he's the one who called me... Dale's expression went dark. Then you're not dealing with some distant relatives making legal claims. You're dealing with criminals who think you stole their money. Marcus felt sick. This wasn't a blessing. It was a curse. The same curse that had destroyed Gerald Thorne's life. We need to call the police, Dale said. And tell them what? That I found a fortune hidden by a dead man, and now criminals are threatening me? They'll seize everything. The IRS will take half. I'll be left with nothing, and Emma and Tyler... He stopped, swallowing hard. They'll have nothing. Better than being dead. Marcus stood and paced the vault. There has to be another way. A legal way to claim this that doesn't put us in immediate danger. Like what? I don't know. Lawyers. Good ones. The kind who handle complicated estates and asset recovery. Dale shook his head. Those lawyers cost money you don't have. Marcus looked around the vault at the stacks of cash, the gold, the bonds. Actually, I have plenty of money. The question is how to access it without painting an even bigger target on my back. They sealed the vault and drove back to town as darkness fell. Marcus dropped Dale off and headed to the library before it closed. He needed to research estate law, asset recovery, anything that might give him a framework for claiming this fortune legally. Mrs. Patterson looked surprised to see him again. Back so soon? Research project, Marcus said vaguely. He spent 2 hours reading about treasure trove law, abandoned property statutes, and estate claims. The legal framework was murky, but not impossible. If he could prove the property was his and the assets were found on his property, he had a legitimate claim. The IRS would want their share, probably close to 40%, but what remained would still be life-changing. The problem was doing it safely. The moment he made a public claim, everyone would know, including Corso and whoever else had been hunting this money for decades. Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. 36 hours remaining. His blood went cold. They were counting down. Whatever they planned to do, it was coming soon. He texted back, Who is this? What do you want? The response came immediately. Half. Give us half, and we disappear. Keep it all, and you disappear. Marcus stared at the message. Half of 260 million was 130 million. Still an unimaginable fortune. But the idea of negotiating with criminals, of rewarding threats with payment, made him sick. He thought of Sarah. What would she do? She'd say fight. She'd say stand up. She'd say don't let fear make your decisions. But she'd also say protect your children. Keep them safe. Don't be stupid trying to be brave. Marcus drove home, his mind churning. He needed help. Real help. Professional help. He made a decision and pulled out his laptop. He searched for law firms specializing in complex estate issues, filtering for firms in major cities with reputations for handling unusual cases. He found one in Charlotte, Bright and Associates, with a specialty in asset recovery and estate litigation. He called their emergency line. A receptionist answered, "I need to speak with an attorney. Tonight, if possible. I've discovered a significant estate asset, and I'm being threatened." "Sir, our attorneys don't typically take calls after hours. I'm talking about $260 million and credible death threats. Please." A pause. "Hold, please." 2 minutes later, a woman's voice came on the line. "This is Victoria Bright. You mentioned a significant discovery?" Marcus took a breath and told her everything. The auction, the vault, the money, the threats. He half expected her to laugh or hang up, but she listened in silence. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Reed, what you're describing is either the most elaborate prank call I've received or you're in serious danger. Which is it?" "I can prove everything. I have photographs, documents, spreadsheets. This is real." "Then you need to come to Charlotte immediately, tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have. And Mr. Reed, don't go home tonight. Get a hotel. Pay cash. Tell no one where you are." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "You think I'm really in danger?" "I think if what you're telling me is true, you have one of two choices. Come in and do this right, with legal protection and security, or go into hiding and hope they never find you." She paused. "There's no third option." Marcus checked into a budget hotel on the outskirts of town, paying cash like Victoria had suggested. He texted Rachel that he needed the kids to stay with her for a few more days. Emergency work situation. She replied with barely concealed frustration, but agreed. He lay on the scratchy hotel comforter, staring at the ceiling, and felt the weight of the past week crushing down on him. 7 days ago, he'd been a broke carpenter facing eviction. Now he was sitting on a fortune that might get him killed. His phone rang. Unknown number again. He almost didn't answer. Then something made him pick up. "Yeah? Mr. Reed?" An older man's voice, gravelly, unfamiliar. "My name is Vincent Corso. I think we should talk." Marcus sat up, his heart pounding. "How did you get this number?" "I've been watching that property for 30 years. You think I don't have contacts? You think I can't find out who bought it at auction?" Corso coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I'm 78 years old, Mr. Reed. I don't have time for games. What do you want?" "What I've always wanted, what Gerald Thorne stole from my employers 40 years ago. $260 million. It wasn't yours." Corso laughed, bitter and harsh. "Wasn't mine? Boy, I helped launder half that money. I set up the businesses Thorne used. I protected him for years. And when the heat came down, he took everything and ran. Left me holding the bag. I did 5 years in federal prison because of him. That's not my problem." "It became your problem when you opened that vault." Corso's voice hardened. "I've got nothing to lose, Mr. Reed. I'm dying. Cancer, same as your wife. Funny how that works. But before I go, I'm getting what I'm owed. I'm not giving you anything." "Then I'm taking it." And if you get in the way, I'll take you out too. You and anyone who helps you." Corso paused. "I know you got kids. Emma and Tyler, right? They're staying with their Aunt Rachel on Maple Street." Pure terror flooded through Marcus. "You stay away from them." "That's up to you. Meet me tomorrow night, midnight, at the Tree Mansion. Bring half the cash, 100 million in bills. I'll disappear, and your kids stay safe. And if I don't, then I stop playing nice." The line went dead. Marcus sat frozen, his phone clenched so tight in his hand it hurt. They knew about Emma and Tyler. They knew where they were staying. This wasn't an empty threat anymore. He called Rachel immediately. "I need you to pack the kids up tonight. Take them somewhere safe. A hotel, your mother's place, anywhere but your house." "Marcus, what's going on?" "Just trust me, please. I can't explain right now, but I need them somewhere safe." Rachel's voice went sharp with fear. "You're scaring me. What have you gotten into?" "I'm fixing it. I promise. But please, take them somewhere tonight. I'll call you tomorrow." He hung up before she could argue and immediately called Victoria Bright back. "They threatened my children!" Victoria's voice was calm but firm. "Then we move now. Not tomorrow. Now. I'm sending a security team to your hotel and to your sister-in-law's address. Professional protection, former law enforcement. They'll keep everyone safe while we handle this." "How? How do we handle this?" "We go public before Corso can make a move. Full press conference, legal filing, everything. We take away his advantage by making this so visible he can't touch you without bringing down hell." Marcus closed his eyes. "That's risky." "Everything about this is risky. But right now, your best defense is transparency. We make the world know what you found, establish your legal claim, and dare him to try something in the spotlight." "What about the money? The IRS?" "We'll deal with that. Yes, you'll pay taxes, significant taxes, but you'll still walk away with enough to change your life and your children's lives forever, assuming we can keep you alive long enough to collect it." Marcus made his decision. "Okay. What do I need to do?" "Stay at the hotel. My security team will be there within 2 hours. Tomorrow morning we're holding a press conference in Harmon Falls. And Mr. Reed, bring everything. Every photograph, every document, every piece of evidence you have. We're going to war, and we need ammunition." 2 hours later, Marcus met Robert Kane, a former FBI agent who now ran private security for Bright and Associates. Kane was in his 50s, built like someone who'd spent his life in gyms and fight training, with eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Reed, I've seen your evidence. This is one hell of a situation." "Can you protect my kids?" "Already done. My team has eyes on them right now. They're safe." Kane pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a live feed. Emma and Tyler were in a hotel room with Rachel watching TV, oblivious to the dangers circling around them. Marcus felt his eyes sting with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still have to get through the next 48 hours. Kane sat down across from him. "Tell me about Vincent Corso. Everything you know." Marcus shared what he'd learned from Thorne's documents and from the phone call. Kane took notes, his expression growing darker. "Corso's connected, or was. Worked for the Rosselli organization back in the day, mid-level enforcer and money man. Did time in the 80s for racketeering, got out in 91, dropped off the radar after that." Kane looked up. "If he's been hunting this money for 30 years, he's not going to give up just because we hold a press conference." "So what do we do?" "We make it impossible for him to win. We establish legal ownership, get law enforcement involved, make any move against you a federal case, and we hope he's smart enough to realize he's lost." "And if he's not?" Kane's expression was grim. Then we make sure you and your family are protected when he makes his play." The next morning, Marcus stood in a conference room at the Harmon Falls Community Center, facing a crowd of reporters, cameras, and curious townspeople. Victoria Bright stood beside him, professional and calm in a navy suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. She'd coached him on what to say, how to present the discovery as a legal estate matter rather than a treasure hunt. But standing there under the lights, Marcus felt like he was going to be sick. Victoria stepped to the microphone. "Good morning, my name is Victoria Bright, and I represent Marcus Reed. We've called this conference to announce a significant discovery on property Mr. Reed recently purchased at public auction." She outlined the facts cleanly, professionally. The tree mansion, the hidden vault, the assets estimated at $260 million, carefully preserved by the previous owner, Gerald Thorne. Mr. Reed has fully cooperated with local authorities and the IRS. He's claiming legal ownership of these assets under treasure trove law and state property statutes. We're filing all necessary documentation today and expect this matter to be resolved through proper legal channels. Then she stepped aside and Marcus took the microphone. His hands shook, but his voice came out steady. "My name is Marcus Reed. 8 months ago, I lost my wife to cancer. 2 weeks ago, I bought an old property for $5,000, hoping to rebuild my life and provide for my 2 children. What I found has changed everything. But I want to be clear, I'm not keeping this money for myself. A significant portion will go to taxes, as it should. What remains, I plan to use to help others. Families dealing with medical debt, people facing the kind of loss I've faced. My wife always dreamed of helping people. Now I have the means to make that dream real." Reporters erupted with questions. Victoria fielded most of them, but one got through to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, are you aware that some people might claim this money isn't legally yours?" Marcus looked directly at the camera. "I'm aware that Gerald Thorne hid this fortune to protect it from people who threatened him. I'm aware that there may be individuals who believe they have a claim to it. But I found it on my property, purchased legally, and I'm prepared to defend that claim in court, not in the shadows. It was a direct message to Corso, come at me legally or not at all." The press conference ended. Victoria whisked Marcus into a waiting car with tinted windows. Kane sat in the front seat, and another security guard Marcus hadn't met drove. "That went well," Victoria said. "We've established your claim publicly. Now we wait to see how Corso responds." They didn't have to wait long. Marcus's phone rang that afternoon. Corso's number. Kane nodded for him to answer, holding up a device to trace the call. "Yeah? You're making a mistake, Reed." Corso's voice was tight with fury. "You think going public protects you? All you did was make this personal." "What I did was make it impossible for you to touch me without consequences." "Consequences?" Corso laughed. "Boy, I've lived with consequences my whole life. A few more don't scare me." "Then take me to court, make a legal claim, but threatening my children? That's over." Corso was quiet for a moment. "You really think you won?" "I think I made the right choice." "We'll see." The line went dead. Kane checked his device. "Got him. Called from a motel in Greenville, about 90 miles from here. I'm sending the location to local law enforcement now." 2 hours later, Victoria called with news. "Police picked up Corso. They're holding him on outstanding warrants, parole violations from his original sentence. He won't be getting out anytime soon." Marcus felt the tension drain from his body like water. "Is it over?" The immediate threat, yes. The legal battle, just beginning. But Mr. Reed, you're going to be fine. We'll navigate the IRS, establish clear ownership, set up trusts for your children. It'll take time, but you'll come through this. That night, Marcus picked up Emma and Tyler from the hotel where they'd been staying with Rachel. They ran to him, throwing their arms around him, and he held them so tight he could barely breathe. "Dad, what's going on?" Tyler asked. Aunt Rachel won't tell us anything. Marcus knelt down, looking at both of them. I found something important, something valuable. And for a little while we had to make sure everyone stayed safe while we figured out what to do with it. The treasure, Emma whispered. You really found treasure. Yeah, baby, I really did. What are you going to do with it? Tyler asked, ever practical. Marcus thought of Sarah, of her dream of helping people, of taking fear away from families facing impossible choices. I'm going to do something good, something that helps people, the way your mom would have wanted. Emma smiled through tears. She'd be proud of you, Daddy. I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in Victoria's office, signing documents that made everything official. After taxes, legal fees, and settling Thorne's outstanding debts to the county, Marcus would receive approximately $153 million. $153 million. The number still didn't feel real. What will you do with it? Victoria asked, echoing Tyler's question. Marcus had been thinking about this for days. He looked out the window at the city below, at all the people rushing through their lives, carrying their own burdens, fighting their own battles. I'm going to finish the Tree Mansion, turn it into something beautiful, a center where families dealing with grief and medical debt can come for help, free counseling, financial assistance, whatever they need. That's ambitious. Sarah was ambitious. She deserved someone who could match that. Victoria smiled. Then let's make it happen. Marcus left the office and drove back to Harmon Falls, to the Tree Mansion standing quiet and patient in its grove of ancient ironwoods. He walked through the halls, no longer seeing decay but possibility. This place had held secrets for 40 years, had been built on fear and isolation. Now it would be built on something else entirely. Hope. Healing. The kind of love that doesn't end when someone dies but transforms into something that helps others survive. The weight of fortune wasn't measured in dollars, it was measured in what you chose to do with them. And Marcus Reed had finally figured out exactly what that was. 6 months after the press conference, Marcus stood at the entrance of the Tree Mansion, watching the first construction crew arrive. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the ironwood trees in shades of rose and gold. He held a thermos of coffee in one hand and a set of blueprints in the other, plans he'd spent countless nights perfecting with architects who understood his vision. The mansion would be restored, yes, but not as a home, as something greater. Dale's truck pulled up behind the construction vehicles and the older man climbed out with his usual gruff efficiency. He'd become Marcus's right-hand man in this project, taking a leave from his regular job to oversee what would be the most important construction work of his life. You ready for this? Dale asked, joining Marcus on the front steps. Marcus looked at the building that had changed everything. The broken windows, the sagging roof, the walls that needed repair. But beneath the decay, he saw the bones of something extraordinary. The ancient trees holding everything together. The craftsmanship of a man who'd built out of fear but had built to last. Sarah used to say that broken things deserve a second chance, Marcus said quietly. That nothing's truly ruined if someone cares enough to fix it. She was talking about people, not buildings. Maybe, but I think the principle holds. Over the next 8 months, the Tree Mansion underwent a transformation that had the whole town talking. Marcus spared no expense, hiring the best craftsmen, the finest materials, but always respecting the original vision. The ironwood trees remained the heart of everything, their massive trunks integrated into the restored structure like living pillars supporting a cathedral. The roof was replaced with slate that would last another 100 years. Windows were custom-made to fit the irregular frames where wood curved around branches. The floors were refinished, revealing beautiful old-growth timber that glowed honey gold in the sunlight. But Marcus added modern elements too. Wheelchair ramps that curved organically around tree roots. A state-of-the-art HVAC system hidden behind original woodwork. soundproofed rooms for private counseling sessions, a commercial kitchen where families could gather for shared meals. The main hall became a community space with comfortable seating, natural light pouring through restored windows, and bookshelves lining the walls. Not just books about grief and healing, but novels and poetry and stories. The kind of things that reminded people there was still beauty in the world. One of the upper rooms became a library and resource center, filled with information about medical assistance programs, financial counseling, legal aid. Everything a family in crisis might need, all in one place. And the basement, the root chamber where Marcus had found the vault, that became something special. The vault itself was empty now, its contents catalogued and distributed according to law and conscience. But the space remained, and Marcus transformed it into a memorial chamber. The walls were lined with photographs and stories of people who'd died too soon. Sarah's picture was there, smiling in the sunshine, holding baby Emma. Anyone could add to the memorial. You just had to bring a photo and a story, and the staff would help you mount it with care and reverence. Over time, the walls filled with faces: a young soldier in uniform, a grandmother surrounded by grandchildren, a child who'd battled cancer, a husband who'd died in a workplace accident. Each one a reminder that grief was universal, that loss connected rather than isolated, that none of them were alone in their pain. Marcus insisted on one design element that confused the contractors but made perfect sense to him. In the memorial chamber, the massive roots that formed the natural architecture were left exposed, even celebrated. They were sanded smooth and sealed, but never hidden. They curved through the space like the bones of the earth itself. Why keep the roots visible? The lead architect had asked. Marcus ran his hand along one of the ancient wooden curves. Because roots are what hold us up when everything else falls apart. Because they go deep, deeper than the pain. Because they connect us to something older and stronger than ourselves. The architect had nodded slowly. You're not just building a center. You're building a metaphor. I'm building what Sarah would have built if she'd had the chance. 10 months after construction began, the Sarah Reed Memorial Center for Hope and Healing opened its doors. Marcus had agonized over the name, worried it was too personal, too much about his loss, but Emma had insisted. Mom would want people to know who she was, Emma had said, with the clarity of a 10-year-old who understood things adults tried to complicate. She'd want them to know that someone who suffered made something to help other people not suffer as much. The opening wasn't a grand celebration. No ribbons, no politicians giving speeches, no media spectacle, just a quiet gathering of people who needed what this place offered. Families who'd lost someone, individuals drowning in medical debt, parents trying to hold things together after tragedy shattered their lives. Marcus stood in the main hall and welcomed each person individually. He shook hands that trembled with exhaustion and grief. He hugged strangers who broke down crying the moment someone showed them kindness. He listened to stories that ripped his heart open all over again because they were so much like his own. A woman in her 40s approached him, holding the hand of a teenage boy who looked hollowed out by loss. Mr. Reed, I'm Jennifer Lawson. This is my son, Chris. We lost my husband, his father, 4 months ago. Heart attack, no warning. The medical bills and funeral costs were drowning. I saw the article about this place and I thought... Her voice broke. I thought maybe someone might understand. Marcus did understand. He understood exactly. You're in the right place. Come on, let me introduce you to our financial counselor. We'll help you figure this out. Chris looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for 15 years. Is it true you found treasure? I found money, Marcus said carefully, but the treasure is what we do with it. Over the first month, the center helped 37 families. They paid off medical bills that would have bankrupted people. They covered funeral expenses so families didn't have to choose between saying goodbye properly and keeping their homes. They connected people with grief counselors, support groups, legal aid. But more than the financial help, they offered something harder to quantify: community, the understanding that came from being around others who knew what it felt like when the bottom fell out of your world. Emma started volunteering at the center after school. She was too young for official duties, but she'd sit with the younger children who came with their grieving parents. She'd color with them, read to them, just be present in the way only someone who'd survived loss could be. Marcus watched her one afternoon sitting on the floor with a 6-year-old boy whose mother had died of an overdose. Emma was showing him how to make a paper crane, her voice gentle and patient. The boy was crying, and Emma didn't try to stop him. She just kept folding paper and being there. "She's got Sarah's heart," Dale said, standing beside Marcus. "She's got her own heart. But yeah, I see Sarah in her." Marcus swallowed hard. The gift of presence, the ability to sit with pain without trying to fix it. Tyler found his purpose in a different way. He'd always been mechanically inclined, and he started teaching woodworking classes in one of the outbuildings Marcus had converted into a workshop. Building to heal, he called it, and people came, men mostly, but not exclusively, who needed to work with their hands while they processed their grief. They built birdhouses and picture frames and small furniture pieces, simple projects that required focus, but not perfection. And while their hands were busy, their mouths would open, stories would pour out, tears would fall onto sawdust, and somehow, in the act of creating something, they'd find a way to carry their loss a little easier. Marcus watched his son become a young man through this work. Tyler was only 13, but he moved through the workshop with a confidence and gentleness that made grown men twice his age trust him with their pain. One evening, Marcus found Tyler in the workshop alone, sanding a small box made of cherry wood. The boy's face was wet with tears. "Tyler, what's wrong?" Tyler didn't stop sanding. "Mr. Patterson died today. Heart attack. His son came by to tell us. Mr. Patterson was making this box for his wife's birthday." He ran his hand over the smooth wood. "I'm going to finish it for him. Make sure she gets it." Marcus sat down beside his son. "That's a beautiful thing to do. Mom would have done it." "Yeah, she would have." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the whisper of sandpaper on wood. Then Tyler said, "Dad, do you think she knows about all this? Do you think she can see what we built?" Marcus thought about all the easy answers. "Of course she can. She's watching over us. She's proud of you." But Tyler deserved more than platitudes. "I don't know if the dead can see what we do, but I know this. Everything good in me, everything that makes me want to help people, I learned from loving her. So in that way, she's in every part of this place. She's in the walls, she's in the work, she's in the way we treat people who are hurting." Tyler nodded, wiping his eyes. "That's better than heaven, I think. Being part of something that keeps helping people." By the end of the first year, the center had assisted over 300 families. Word spread through social media, local news, and most powerfully, person to person. Someone who'd been helped would tell someone else who was struggling. A social worker would refer a client. A hospital chaplain would hand out brochures to families facing impossible medical bills. Marcus hired a full staff: grief counselors, financial advisors, social workers, administrative assistants, people who believed in the mission and brought their own experiences of loss to the work. He established a foundation with a significant portion of the fortune, ensuring the center could operate in perpetuity. The lawyers had estimated his after-tax take at $153 million. He kept enough to secure his children's futures, college funds, a modest trust that would give them stability but not excess. The rest went into the foundation. "You're giving away $100 million, Victoria had said when he'd told her the plan. "Most people would keep more for themselves." "I've got everything I need. A home," My kids are taken care of, the ability to do work that matters. What else is there? Victoria had smiled. Your wife would be proud. The tree mansion itself became a landmark. Architectural magazines wrote features about the innovative integration of living trees with modern construction. Grief counseling organizations studied their model. Universities sent students to observe their programs. But for Marcus, the real measure of success came in quieter moments, like the day a man in his 60s approached him in the memorial chamber. The man was staring at a photograph of a young woman, maybe 30, with a bright smile and kind eyes. "That's my daughter," the man said. "Melissa. She died 3 years ago. Car accident. I couldn't afford to bury her properly. Had to do cremation when she'd wanted a full service. It's haunted me ever since." Marcus stood beside him. "I'm sorry. I came here because I heard you help people, but I don't need money anymore. I just needed to put her picture somewhere beautiful, somewhere people would see her and know she mattered." She did matter. She does matter. The man wiped his eyes. "This place, what you built here, it's not just about the help you give. It's about the dignity. You treat grief like it deserves respect, not pity." Marcus thought about that conversation for days afterward. Dignity. They'd built a place that honored pain rather than trying to rush people past it, that recognized grief as evidence of love, not weakness to overcome. 2 years after opening, the center expanded. Marcus purchased adjacent property and built housing, small cottages where families in crisis could stay for a few weeks or months, free of charge. A safe place to land while they figured out their next steps. Rachel had reconciled with Marcus by then, understanding finally that he wasn't running from his responsibilities, but running towards something bigger. She volunteered at the center too, helping coordinate housing assignments and welcome families. "I was wrong about you," she admitted one afternoon as they sorted donated clothing in one of the cottages. "After Sarah died, I thought you were falling apart. I thought you'd drag Emma and Tyler down with you." "I was falling apart," Marcus said. "I just fell apart in a direction that ended up mattering." She'd be so proud of you. Not just the center. The way you've been there for the kids. The way you turned grief into something that heals other people's grief. Marcus folded a small shirt, something that would fit a child Emma's age, and felt the familiar ache. "I miss her every single day. Some days it's better, some days it's worse, but it never goes away." It's not supposed to go away. Love doesn't die just because a person does. On the 3rd anniversary of Sarah's death, Marcus and the children held a private ceremony in the memorial chamber. They stood in front of her photograph, surrounded by hundreds of other faces, other stories. Emma had written a letter. She read it aloud, her voice strong despite the tears. "Dear Mom, I'm 12 now. I'm taller than most of the boys in my class, which is weird. Tyler is teaching me woodworking, but I'm not very good at it yet. Dad built something amazing. He took all that money and made it mean something. There's a lady here named Mrs. Chen." Marcus made a mental note that he'd have to actually keep the name Chen this time since it came from Emma, who lost her son, and I help take care of her granddaughter sometimes. "It makes me feel close to you, helping people, like I'm doing what you would have done. I miss you so much it hurts. But Dad says that's okay. He says missing someone means you loved them right. I think we did. I think we still do. Love, Emma." Tyler spoke next, his voice deeper now at 14. "Mom, I don't remember as much as I wish I did. I remember you singing. I remember you made the best pancakes. I remember you were always patient, even when I was being difficult." He paused, collecting himself. "Dad told me you wanted to help people. We're doing that now. All of us. I hope that makes you happy wherever you are." Then it was Marcus's turn. He'd prepared words, written them down, practiced them. But standing there in that chamber of roots and remembrance, the prepared speech fell away. Sarah, you asked me to promise I'd be okay. I didn't think I could keep that promise. For a long time, I wasn't okay. I was broken and lost and so angry at the universe for taking you." He took a shaky breath. "But I found something in the darkness. Not just money, though that's what it looked like. I found purpose. I found a way to turn the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that helps others survive their worst things. I found a way to keep loving you by loving the work you would have done if you'd had more time." He touched her photograph gently. "You're not gone. You're in every family we help, every tear we witness, every moment we sit with someone's pain and don't look away. You're in the roots of this place, holding us all up." Emma slipped her hand into his. Tyler stood on his other side, and together they stood in the silence, surrounded by memories and stories, by grief transformed into grace. Upstairs, the center continued its work. A support group met in the main hall. A financial counselor reviewed bills with a young widow. In the kitchen, volunteers prepared a community meal. Outside, the ironwood trees stood sentinel, their roots going deep into the earth, holding everything together. By the 5th anniversary of Sarah's death, and 3 years after the center's opening, the impact had spread far beyond Harmon Falls. The foundation had helped over 1,500 families. They'd paid off $12 million in medical debt. They'd provided grief counseling to thousands. They'd given people time and space to heal when the world demanded they move on before they were ready. Other communities started reaching out, asking how to replicate the model. Marcus helped where he could, sharing their systems, their philosophy, their hard-won understanding of what grieving people actually needed. A documentary crew came to film the center. Marcus initially resisted. This wasn't about publicity. But Victoria convinced him that sharing the story might inspire others. The filmmaker was a woman named Claire who'd lost her own spouse young. She understood the mission instinctively. She interviewed Marcus, the kids, the staff, and most importantly, the families who'd been helped. One interview stuck with Marcus, a man named David, barely 25, who'd lost his wife in childbirth. He sat in the memorial chamber, holding his infant daughter, and spoke about finding the center when he was contemplating suicide. "I couldn't see a way forward," David said. "I had this baby who needed me, and I couldn't even get out of bed. The bills were crushing me. The grief was crushing me. Then someone told me about this place, and I thought, why not? What do I have to lose?" He looked directly at the camera. "They didn't just help with the bills, though they did that. They helped me remember I wasn't alone, that other people had survived this, that I could too." David's daughter cooed, grabbing at his finger. "Now I come back here as a volunteer. I help other young widowers because I remember how dark it was, and I want them to know there's light on the other side." When Marcus watched the rough cut of the documentary, he cried through the entire thing. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude that something beautiful had come from something so broken. The documentary aired on a major streaming platform. Within a week, donations poured in from across the country, people who'd experienced loss and wanted to support the work. The foundation's endowment grew, the mission expanded, but Marcus kept the focus local. The Tree Mansion remained the heart of everything, the place where it all started, the physical reminder that hidden blessings sometimes come wrapped in the strangest packages. On what would have been Sarah's 45th birthday, Marcus sat alone on the front steps of the Tree Mansion as the sun set. Emma and Tyler were inside, helping close up for the evening. The ancient ironwoods rustled in the wind, their branches swaying like they were dancing to music only they could hear. Dale found him there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He'd become more than a friend over these years, more like family. "Thought you might want company," Dale said, handing over a cup. "Always." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Dale said, "You know what the craziest part is?" "What?" "Gerald Thorne hid that money because he was afraid. He spent 40 years in fear, protecting his fortune from people who wanted to take it. He died alone, never spending a dollar of it, never enjoying a moment of it. And you took that same money, built from the same fear, and turned it into the opposite, into connection, into generosity, into something that brings people together instead of pushing them apart. Marcus thought about that. Maybe that's what breaks a curse, not ignoring it or running from it, but transforming it, taking the thing that was meant to isolate and harm and making it heal instead. You think Thorne's curse is broken? I think curses are just patterns. Fear creating more fear, pain creating more pain. But patterns can be broken. New ones can be started. Dale nodded slowly. Sarah would have loved this place. Yeah, she would have. As darkness fell, lights came on inside the tree mansion. Warm yellow light spilled through windows, illuminating the ironwood trees, making them glow. Inside, the memorial chamber held its vigil of photographs and stories. The counseling rooms stood ready for tomorrow's sessions. The community kitchen held supplies for tomorrow's meals. And deep below, in the chamber that had once held a fortune, roots continued their ancient work, holding, supporting, connecting, going deeper than the darkness, older than the fear. Marcus stood, feeling the weight of 5 years of grief and growth settling into something like peace. Not the absence of pain, he'd never stop missing Sarah, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that her love hadn't ended with her death but had transformed into something that would outlive them all. Emma and Tyler emerged from the building, ready to go home. Home now was a modest house on the edge of the property. Nothing fancy, just enough space for the three of them and a workshop for Tyler's projects. "You okay, Dad?" Emma asked, slipping her hand into his. "Yeah, baby. I'm okay." And for the first time since Sarah died, he realized it was true. He was okay. Not healed, grief doesn't work that way, but whole in a different way, broken and mended and stronger for it. They walked to the truck together as the first stars appeared. Behind them, the tree mansion stood quiet and strong, held up by roots that went deep, that connected, that endured. Some people inherit money. Some inherit land. Marcus Reed had inherited both. But what he'd really inherited was a choice. The choice between fear and faith, between hoarding and healing, between letting grief destroy him and letting it transform him into something capable of easing others' grief. He'd chosen transformation, and in doing so, he'd built something that would last long after the money was gone, long after the building crumbled, long after his own story ended. Because legacy isn't measured in dollars or square footage or years. It's measured in the lives you touch, the pain you acknowledge, the hope you nurture when hope seems impossible. Marcus Reed, carpenter and widower and father, had built a legacy worthy of the woman who'd taught him how to love. And in the quiet of that evening, with his children beside him and the ironwood trees standing sentinel, he felt her presence not as absence but as the foundation beneath everything good he'd built. The roots went deep, deep enough to hold them all. Anyone can find money if they're lucky enough to look in the right place. But not everyone can transform that money into meaning. Not everyone can choose light when darkness would be easier. Not everyone can build bridges from the broken pieces of their heart. As the night settled over the tree mansion that had been laughed at, mocked, and dismissed, Marcus Reed understood the truth. The real fortune was never in the vault. It was in what he'd built above it. The real wealth wasn't counted in dollars. It was measured in lives touched, families healed, and love that refused to die even when death had done its worst. The widowed father who'd bought a forgotten estate for $5,000 had found $260 million beneath its roots. But what he'd built above ground, that was priceless. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hope, hidden treasures, and the courage to rebuild. Click to keep discovering what happens when ordinary people find extraordinary purpose. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the greatest fortunes aren't found in vaults, they're built in hearts.